Certain names and specifics have been altered to protect the privacy of those involved. Some imagery is for illustrative purposes. On July 20th, 2016, the Shadows of Oregon's Deschutes National Forest claimed 2 victims, marking the start of a decade-long psychological enigma. 24-year-old Sara Cruz and her younger sister Deborah, age 23, were camped near Cultus Lake. At approximately 8 in the evening, neighbors heard a volatile dispute before the pair vanished into the gathering dusk in opposite directions. Their campsite remained empty. 5 months to the day, they surfaced nearly 180 miles north, confined in a stark metal enclosure within a derelict industrial plant. The true nightmare began when investigators breached the lock and spoke their names. There was no relief, only a primal, visceral terror as the sisters pleaded for protection from each other. While they survived physically, the bond of sisterhood had been surgically erased from their minds. What force could compel a human brain to delete its own flesh and blood? And who orchestrated this descent into a cold, mechanical survival state? July 20th, 2016, began with deceptively clear skies over the Deschutes wilderness. This vast expanse of timber stretches across the Cascades, a labyrinth of hidden ravines and treacherous terrain. Deep within, at a site near Cultus Lake, Sara and Deborah Cruz sought to mend a fractured relationship after months of bitter estrangement. Records indicate the sisters checked in around 2 in the afternoon. The ranger on duty later recalled their palpable tension and the heavy silence between them. Sara handled the registration, paying for 3 nights in cash while requesting the most secluded lot available. They were assigned Site 42, a remote spot tucked under the suffocating canopy of ancient pines. The wilderness offered no sanctuary. The oppressive quiet only seemed to sharpen their resentment. By 8 p.m., the forest became a silent backdrop to a final, explosive confrontation. A family from California, stationed some 300 yards away, provided a chilling account to local authorities. The father described voices escalating into frantic screams. Wind shear muffled the specifics of the argument, but the message was clear. One sister vowed never to see the other again. Then came the sharp zip of a tent. Witnesses watched as 2 silhouettes retreated into the gloom. One drifted north, the other east, heading straight into the unmapped heart of predator territory. As temperatures dipped toward 50 degrees, the Cruz sisters vanished into the night. At 9:30 the next morning, a routine patrol discovered the abandoned remains of Site 42. The tent stood wide open, its interior eerily undisturbed, with sleeping bags perfectly laid out. Half-consumed water bottles sat on the table alongside their most vital belongings, wallets, cash, keys, and phones all left behind. There was no evidence of a struggle. Sara's vehicle remained parked over a mile from the site, untouched. By 11 a.m., the county launched one of its most intensive search operations on record. A massive force of volunteers and canine units descended on the lake, grid mapping the forest. Searchers moved in a synchronized line, scouring every inch of the forest floor. 3 thermal-equipped helicopters began sweeping the canopy from above. For 12 hours, they scanned a 10-mile radius, but the sensors picked up only the heat signatures of wildlife. As evening approached, the canine unit finally made a breakthrough. 2 German shepherds, catching the scent from the sisters' clothing, began a determined pursuit. The path split from the tent but reconverged after 200 yards, forging a single trail deep into the eastern woods. The hounds led their handlers through punishing brush and overfallen timber, pushing 2 miles into a wilderness where no casual hiker would ever venture. The investigation pivoted toward a decaying gravel path, a relic of logging operations from the 1980s. This overgrown route carved a path parallel to the modern lanes of Highway 97. It was here the canine units suddenly lost the trail, pacing in frantic circles and letting out mournful whimpers. The scent of the women hadn't dissipated. It simply vanished atop the gray stone, as if the sisters had been snatched directly into the sky. Forensic teams meticulously scrutinized the surrounding terrain. There were no personal effects and no biological evidence to suggest a struggle with local wildlife. Instead, 2 deep, symmetrical trenches were pressed firmly into the damp earth. These were fresh impressions left by the heavy-duty tires of a commercial van, a vehicle with no legal reason to be in this restricted zone. The driver had pulled over at the exact coordinates where the girl's scent went cold. The vehicle then sped toward the main highway, leaving nothing but a haunting silence in its wake. On December 17, 2016, exactly 5 months since the disappearance at Cultus Lake, the search reached a jarring and sudden turning point. Nearly 186 miles north of the Deschutes forest, a A winter chill gripped the industrial district of Troutdale. Beneath a ceiling of charcoal clouds and steady rain, the area was a graveyard of identical, lifeless concrete warehouses. At 9:30 in the morning, an inspector from the local utility provider arrived at a massive storage complex for a routine audit. Records indicated a massive, unexplained spike in power consumption on one of the lines over the past several months. The source of the constant electrical draw was identified as Unit 118. On paper, this 2,000-square-foot metal bay was listed as vacant and long ago disconnected from the grid. However, as the inspector neared the heavy corrugated steel doors, he realized the official documents were wrong. A deep, mechanical thrumming vibrated through the metal walls. It was the unmistakable sound of an industrial-grade ventilation system running at full power. The air near the external vents shimmered, driven by the sheer force of the machinery humming inside. Suspecting a clandestine narcotics lab, the inspector retreated and called 911 at 10:15. 2 patrol cars were on the scene by 10:42. Officers spoke with the site managers, who confirmed the unit was supposed to be completely unoccupied. After obtaining emergency clearance, the police deployed heavy-duty hydraulic shears. It took nearly 10 minutes of grinding effort to snap the 2 massive padlocks. When the steel door groaned open, the officers breached with their sidearms drawn, expecting an armed confrontation. What they discovered, however, caused the veteran officers to freeze in pure psychological shock. There was no drug lab. The interior was drenched in a sterile, blinding white radiance, cast by high-intensity fluorescent lamps mounted to the ceiling. A massive steel cage stood in the center of the hangar like a macabre exhibit. The structure was welded from heavy iron bars, covering an area of roughly 400 square feet. Inside the enclosure, a separate environmental control system was active, maintaining a clinical level of cleanliness that felt alien against the grimy concrete of the warehouse floor. 2 human figures sat behind the bars on thin floor mattresses. They were severely emaciated, their frames draped in identical gray shirts, their skin a sickly, almost translucent shade from months of light deprivation. The lead sergeant cautiously approached the cage. Studying their gaunt faces, he recognized them from the missing persons posters that had been in every precinct for 5 months. They were Sara, age 24, and Deborah Cruz, age 23. The relief of finding them alive was momentary, quickly replaced by a cold, sickening realization. According to the sergeant's official account, he took a single step closer, holstered his weapon, and addressed them in his most reassuring tone. He informed the girls that the police had arrived and that they were finally safe, but the response he received shattered all logic. At the mention of the word sisters, Sara flinched as if she had been struck. She retreated to the cell's dark perimeter, her frame racked by violent tremors. Wide-eyed and frantic, her gaze betrayed a primal, visceral brand of terror. She shot Deborah a look of pure dread before her voice dissolved into a raspy, jagged whisper. Police reports from the scene detail a chilling encounter. Petrified, she pleaded for the removal of the stranger, swearing she had never laid eyes on her. Deborah offered no solace. Her own reaction was equally haunting and detached. She shut her eyes tight and buried her head, desperately trying to erase her sister's presence. Her drained body began a rhythmic, robotic sway, signaling a profound psychological collapse. Sharing that small, sterile space seemed to inflict genuine physical agony upon her. Their bodies survived the ordeal, yet the bond of sisterhood had been completely incinerated. In place of family ties, a massive, unbridgeable chasm of fear took root. What level of psychological warfare could force 2 siblings to scrub one another from memory? Before we dig deeper into this mystery, please consider subscribing and engaging with the video to help surface this investigation. Your interactions signal the algorithm to share this case with a wider, global audience. Community support is the only thing that keeps these deep dive investigations possible. On December 18, 2016, Portland Medical Center became a high-security lockdown zone. Inside the psych ward, clinicians faced a behavioral anomaly that defied every known medical law. Against a backdrop of cold white walls, a devastating mental tragedy began to reveal itself. Investigators were prepared to document the typical scars of a 5-month abduction, like fractures, restraints, or signs of sexual assault. But the physical workup of Sara, 24, and Deborah, 23, left veteran doctors baffled. The toxicology screens returned entirely negative results. No narcotics, no sedatives, and zero evidence of physical trauma or recent scarring. Their only physical ailments were severe malnutrition and a total lack of vitamin D. While their bodies remained strangely intact, their identities had been methodically dismantled. Scientific curiosity quickly shifted into a state of sheer professional disbelief. The horror peaked during the initial attempt at a supervised family reunion. The lead criminal psychiatrist noted a reaction that had no precedent in medical history. As Sara entered the room where her sister sat waiting, the anticipated emotional embrace was replaced by a scene from a nightmare. Sara's breathing seized as her heart rate spiked to 140 beats per minute. She fought the orderlies, screaming hysterically that she had no connection to the woman before her. Deborah fled to the corner, shielding her ears as if under physical bombardment. She let out a low, constant drone while rocking in place, forcing a total tactical shift. Doctors later presented them with family photos from Christmas 2014. The experiment failed. Just seeing her sister's face triggered a massive, violent panic attack. Any mention of their shared past, or even the word sister, caused their systems to physically reject the information. This wasn't a performance. Their minds had genuinely formatted the data of their lives. Following days of exhaustive clinical observation, experts diagnosed a case of dissociative amnesia, born from an unthinkable psychological wound. They weren't broken in the traditional sense. Their minds had built a defensive fortress. Their brains had initiated a brutal, high-stakes psychological survival protocol. With surgical precision, their consciousness had simply deleted the very existence of one another. The emotional bond had mutated into a source of such agony that total psychological erasure became the only means of survival. For the behavioral analysis team, the clinical findings acted as a pivot point, shattering their previous assumptions about the abductor. Evidence suggested the captor in that Troutdale hangar wasn't fueled by bloodlust or the typical hallmarks of physical torture. They saw a cold, calculating strategist of the human psyche. He severed their familial identity with the surgical precision of a blade, removing a malignant growth. Triggering such profound psychological collapse in two vibrant adults within 150 days required a highly calibrated system. A rigid, lethal cycle of influence, where the cost of defiance forced the mind to discard its most fundamental attachments. One chilling question remained, looming over the task force and fueling their deepest fears. What dark psychological blueprint had this designer of terror implemented inside that cold steel vault to turn their shared devotion into a hollow void? On December 20th, 2016, the search for the missing Cruz siblings escalated into a major federal operation. Since the victims were snatched and transported nearly 186 miles from the initial disappearance site, the Federal Bureau of Investigation assumed total control. Specialized profilers from the Behavioral Analysis Unit in Portland examined the records and the victims' shattered mental states, reaching a swift, chilling consensus. This wasn't the work of a disorganized predator acting on a whim or a sudden frenzy drive, but rather a calculated, highly structured operation. To decipher how two grown women vanished from the thick woods of Deschutes only to surface in a metal box within a desolate factory district, agents revisited the case's inception. They returned to the secluded dirt path near Highway 97, where the canine units had stalled 5 months prior. The following morning, the FBI's Forensic Rapid Deployment Squad touched down at the site. The woods met the team with a biting chill and a heavy, overcast sky, their gear soaked by the persistent mist. Technicians focused on faint, lingering impressions of dual tire tracks preserved in the damp earth beneath a blanket of rotted pine needles. By employing three-dimensional scans and a forensic breakdown of soil particulates, the team reconstructed a digital profile of the specific vehicle involved. The data analysis yielded findings that stunned the local sheriff's department. The track width and pattern didn't match the heavy timber machinery or the standard pickup trucks used by local outdoorsmen. The tracks indicated a massive industrial van featuring heavy-duty air suspension, built to haul loads exceeding 15,000 pounds. The presence of such a heavy-duty vehicle on a trail untouched by logging crews for 2 decades was no accident. The Bureau's specialized logistics division immediately began cross-referencing topographic maps, orbital surveillance, and commercial transport logs within a 50-mile radius of Cultus Lake. Intelligence officers mapped the forgotten dirt path against the broader Oregon interstate system. The visualization on their monitors shifted the entire focus of the manhunt. This derelict trail, shielded by the canopy, functioned as a perfect tactical blind spot. It provided heavy haulers a secret passage from Highway 97 directly to Interstate 84. This underground artery bypassed 3 major state checkpoints and all law enforcement stations. After synthesizing these points, federal investigators reached a definitive conclusion. The Deschutes National Forest wasn't just some private killing field for a lone psychopath. The wilderness served as a high-stakes staging ground for an organized black market transport network. It was the ideal hub for midnight smuggling, witnessed only by the silent pines and the local wildlife. The reconstruction of that night, on July 20th, 2016 began to materialize with a chilling, surgical clarity. Detectives rebuilt the timeline second by second. When a bitter shouting match erupted between the sisters around 8 p.m., emotion overruled their survival instincts. Desperate for space, they retreated into the thick timber, oblivious to the basic rules of the wilderness. Nightfall arrived with predatory speed as the mercury plummeted. After trekking more than 2 miles through the suffocating brush, the pair lost their way, straying fatally far from the established trails. They stumbled onto a remote gravel path at the worst possible moment. It was a death sentence. In the pale glow of a cargo van's parking lights, a massive illicit handoff was underway. This wasn't a chance encounter with some solitary predator. They had become the unwilling witnesses to a sophisticated syndicate supply chain. They looked directly into the eyes of armed traffickers, seeing contraband in volumes that would ensure life behind bars in a federal penitentiary. Sensing the gravity of their error, the girls likely bolted for camp, but against professional mercenaries in a dark forest, they stood no chance. To the syndicate, these 2 hikers were a sudden liability requiring an immediate, clinical solution. Executing them on site was too risky. Leaving bodies in the woods would trigger a massive manhunt. That would saturate the area with canine units, hundreds of searchers, and air support. Such heat would permanently burn a transit route worth millions of dollars every month. Therefore, the mastermind behind the shipment made a cold, strictly logistical call. The sisters were loaded into the van with the freight, converted from human beings into mere line items on a manifest. They were hauled 186 miles north and stashed in a warehouse. Now, federal agents faced a new, far more disturbing riddle. Why was a routine smuggling operation linked to a legitimate commercial hangar containing a custom-built steel enclosure with high-end industrial environmental controls? On December 21, 2016, the FBI's gaze shifted from the frozen peaks of Deschutes County to the asphalt sprawl of the Troutdale industrial area. The facility, known as Pacific Crest Storage, spanned 20 acres of isolated land. It was a bleak labyrinth of metal units behind high-tension razor wire. These industrial hubs had long earned a dark reputation with the police as perfect shadows for the criminal underworld. Total anonymity. As long as the rent arrived in cash or through shell corporations, the owners never looked twice. No employee ever peeked behind the heavy, steel doors to see if they held stolen parts, narcotics, or something worse. It was a corporate blind spot where the law hit a wall of client confidentiality. But federal forensics teams scouring Unit 118 for 3 days found one detail that didn't fit. This single element shattered the profile of a typical criminal safe house. The steel cage that served as the girl's private hell wasn't some makeshift pen made of scrap metal. It was a high-tech isolation chamber, engineered with professional ventilation and autonomous environmental systems. Heavy-duty aluminum ducts were integrated into the hangar's ceiling, with industrial filters humming silently to maintain a perfect 72 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of the winter storm outside. Deploying hardware of this complexity demanded the presence of elite, highly trained personnel, structural technicians, heavy-duty cranes, and a financial commitment exceeding $50,000. A common smuggler wouldn't dump such vast resources or invite that level of scrutiny just to hold captives temporarily. To deconstruct this intricate puzzle, financial crimes investigators initiated a grueling, minute-by-minute review of the facility's entire fiscal history over 3 years. Predictably, the trail to find the actual tenant of Unit 118 reached a sudden dead end. The rental contract was buried under a shell company based in a Caribbean tax haven. Detectives then pivoted, shifting their focus toward a physical asset, the sophisticated climate control system itself. Forensics teams recovered manufacturing codes from the massive ventilation fans and commercial heating units. Inquiries sent to the equipment manufacturers finally produced a significant breakthrough. This specific high-end inventory had been shipped in the spring of 2016 to a vendor in Oregon. Carrying a signed federal warrant, special agents took control of the local supplier's internal accounting and sales records. Hidden among thousands of dry audit sheets, bank logs, and routine billing statements, they finally uncovered the missing piece of the puzzle. The trail didn't lead to dangerous cartels or global syndicates, but to a series of ordinary annual tax filings. A chilling fact surfaced. The CEO of the warehouse franchise hadn't even tried to hide the purchase. He handled the entire high-value transaction through the primary bank accounts of his legitimate corporation. The reasoning for such a reckless and, on the surface, utterly irrational move stunned the team with its cold, calculated banality. A successful businessman simply wanted to minimize his personal tax liability to the state. Seized documents confirmed he had formally requested a massive financial deduction. He justified the enormous cost as a critical business improvement, framing the construction of the dungeon as a technical upgrade to boost energy efficiency in his empty units. His obsessive corporate greed and sociopathic confidence, paired with a habit of scraping for every cent of profit, proved more powerful than his instinct for survival. That single accounting entry was the ultimate fatal mistake. It pulled the investigation out of the fog of shell companies and into the harsh light of a conviction. At 2 p.m. on December 22nd, several dark, unmarked SUVs arrived at a modern glass skyscraper in the middle of Portland's high-end commercial district. The undercover team, armed with an arrest warrant, quietly headed for the 4th floor. They moved rapidly down a brightly lit, carpeted hallway, closing the distance to the heavy oak doors of the corner office. Inside, in an expensive chair, sat the man who had systematically dismantled the minds of 2 women, treating them like lab rats in a private, windowless, concrete tomb. But who was this predator hiding in plain sight? What was the truth beneath his identity as a respected executive? And what dark evidence lay buried on his office computer's hard drive? On December 22, 2016, as the office door closed behind the suspect, a digital forensics squad entered the building. The process of gathering electronic data functioned like a perfectly timed machine. Agents in gloves sealed every storage device into specialized protective bags, including laptops, mobile phones, and external drives, as well as the main network servers. The luxury of the sun-drenched office with its designer decor felt disturbingly wrong compared to the concrete nightmare found at the industrial site in Troutdale. Every piece of evidence was whisked away to the federal tech lab under heavy security. Behavioral analysts were now preparing themselves for the horrors the data would eventually reveal. Years spent profiling predators who keep captives suggest that certain psychological trophies are nearly always present. Law enforcement anticipated finding hidden archives filled with images of suffering girls, gigabytes of cage surveillance, dark manifestos, or journals of a sadist obsessed with absolute control over human life. Experts braced themselves to explore the most hollowed-out parts of a fractured mind. Yet, the forensic imaging of the seized drives yielded nothing but constant frustration. Hour after hour, investigative software sifted through terabytes, uncovering only mundane corporate records. Detectives skimmed emails about office supplies, approved vacation requests, and waste management contracts. There was no trace of a double life anywhere, no history of exploring the dark web or searches indicating any interest in torture or psychological violence. The machine belonged to a typical, uninteresting businessman. At 3 a.m. on December 23rd, deep scans flagged a digital anomaly. Buried within a 2016 third-quarter financial folder sat a single encrypted spreadsheet. It took analysts 2 hours of processing power to bypass the security and open it. When the grid finally loaded on the lab monitors, the room went cold and silent. Not one human name appeared in the entire secret file. There were no photos or notes celebrating a predator's victory. The document was a sterile, soulless accounting of a ghost operation. Long columns detailed the monthly upkeep for a warehouse space. There were entries for power, generator fuel, security bonuses, and logistics. And tucked between these standard accounting lines, right after the sanitation costs, were 2 modest cells with clinical labels. Object 1, caloric intake. Object 2, caloric intake. Next to them was an automated water schedule, measured in gallons and calculated against municipal utility rates. Seeing these mundane figures disturbed the investigators more than any crime scene. There was no signature of a madman, no theatrical flair. It was pure, distilled bureaucracy. To the person managing this sheet, Sara and Deborah Cruz were not human beings. They weren't even test subjects. They were just liabilities on a balance sheet, technical units requiring minimal maintenance to protect the bottom line. This file proved they were facing a new breed of offender, an evil that wears a suit and speaks only the language of profit. But when the detective scrolled to the 2017 projections, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Next to the entries for the first and second objects, dated late February, was a single accounting term that sealed the sisters' fate. On December 22, 2016, at 14:15, federal agents raided a corner office in downtown Portland. They were ready for a calculated killer or a violent cartel boss, armed and prepared for any kind of life or death struggle. Instead, the scene they walked into was sickeningly ordinary. Daniel Brown was simply sitting at a polished mahogany desk. At 48, the franchise owner appeared unremarkable in his crisp blue shirt and wire-rimmed spectacles. He sipped lukewarm coffee, his gaze drifting across the market tickers on his monitor with a bored detachment. The architect of this nightmare possessed a temperament that stood in chilling contrast to his crimes. His record was spotless. He was the quintessential corporate cog, living a life of absolute, predictable, suburban routine. Seized financial and medical files painted a portrait of a mundane existence. Daniel managed mild hypertension with a daily dose of prescription blood pressure medication. He dutifully paid his mortgage and alimony, maintaining the facade of a responsible father. When federal agents arrived, he accepted the steel handcuffs with an eerie, silent compliance. His only request was for permission to take his bag of medication from the desk before leaving. Inside the sterile bureau interrogation room, Daniel Brown offered no resistance. He didn't ask for a lawyer, nor did he attempt any desperate performance for the forensic psychologists. Investigators noted his voice was disturbingly flat, entirely stripped of human emotion. He spoke as if delivering a routine quarterly report on corporate losses. Brown wasn't a sadist by nature. He didn't enjoy the suffering. He was just a businessman drowning in secret debt. Years before, a series of failed real estate ventures had pushed him toward total bankruptcy. To maintain his status, he pivoted to a highly lucrative illegal enterprise. He leased his Troutdale hangars to the underworld, engineering a sophisticated smuggling network. He became a vital logistics ghost for a major narcotics cartel. His routes bypassed every government way station, ensuring a seamless flow of contraband. On July 20th, 2016, Brown was in the Deschutes County wilderness, personally managing a critical shipment. According to his recorded confession, the handoff occurred on a secluded gravel road, shielded by a dense canopy of pines. The operation was perfect until two hikers stumbled out of the twilight. Sara and Deborah Cruz had lost their way during a heated argument and walked straight into the cartel's path. They saw the trailers filled with contraband. Worse, they saw the faces of the armed men guarding the cargo. In that moment, Brown faced a cold, logistical dilemma. As a pragmatist, he knew letting them go meant 20 years in a federal cell. Yet, he couldn't kill them in the woods either. Two dead tourists would trigger an unprecedented search operation. The National Guard and hundreds of search dogs would have permanently compromised his transit route. Failure meant the cartel would execute him for the lost profit. He made a decision that chilled investigators with its absolute, detached rationality. He didn't see two young women with lives and families. To him, they were an operational glitch that required immediate isolation. He ordered the gunman to bind the sisters and throw them into the van. Brown had decided to treat these people like surplus inventory. Based on his cold, analytical projections, he calculated a window of exactly 5 months. This was the timeline required to fully dismantle his connections with the syndicate, covertly liquidate the management firm's legitimate holdings, funnel all capital through a labyrinth of shell entities, and vanish from American soil. His destination was a sanctuary beyond the reach of any extradition laws. Through the end of February 2017, the siblings were meant to inhabit that stone tomb, yet a haunting mystery plagued the detectives. Daniel maintained a constant presence at his Portland headquarters, located hundreds of miles away, rarely visiting the facility. Investigators wondered how a mundane office clerk could psychologically paralyze two adults from such a distance, effectively purging their minds of any recognition of their shared bloodline. On December 23, 2016, the inquiry into this unprecedented atrocity reached a chilling and inevitable conclusion. The final, most grotesque revelation involved the assembly of a metal enclosure within a Troutdale industrial park. During grueling hours of interrogation by federal agents, the perpetrator, Daniel Brown, finally detailed the methodology used to erase the sisters' mutual history. This heartless, clinically precise reality unsettled even the most hardened investigators who had witnessed the darkest depths of human depravity. For Brown, a man obsessed with logistical efficiency, the captives represented nothing more than operational liabilities. He sought to eliminate emotional outbursts, escape plans, or any sense of solidarity that might bolster their spirits. The administrator realized that as long as the sisters functioned as a cohesive unit, they remained an erratic risk, capable of drawing unwanted attention to least hangar 118. To mitigate this threat, Brown bypassed traditional physical violence. Instead, he acted as a corporate strategist, implementing a lethal system of behavioral risk management. According to his recorded testimony, immediately following the abduction on July 20, 2016, he tasked cartel laborers with bisecting the steel shipping container. They installed a massive acoustic-grade partition made of thick industrial plexiglass to divide the space. 24-year-old Sara and 23-year-old Deborah remained in each other's line of sight, witnessing every silent agony, yet were stripped of any way to communicate. Once the modifications were complete, Brown initiated a ruthless psychological conditioning program. Utilizing hidden lenses, he monitored his human inventory around the clock from a screen in his professional suite. The dictates of his survival game were absolute. Any attempt by a sister to acknowledge her kin, whether through muffled sobs or pressing her palms against the barrier, or any flicker of empathy, triggered an immediate systemic response. With a few keystrokes, Daniel would remotely deactivate the facility's heating for 24 hours. Within the concrete structure, temperatures would plummet to life-threatening levels almost instantly. If they persisted, he would cut off the water supply or withhold daily nourishment, leaving the victims to endure the pangs of starvation. However, if the women displayed total compliance, remaining motionless on their mats for hours, acting as though the figure beyond the glass was a ghost, the system rewarded them. By avoiding eye contact and maintaining total silence, they triggered an automated feeder that delivered hot meals and water with a mechanical hum. Over 5 months, exactly 150 days of this unrelenting, monotonous cycle, their neural pathways were forced to radically adapt to these extreme constraints to maintain basic biological life. With every repetition of pain and reward, their subconscious minds forged a horrific association. Every memory of their bond, or the smallest gesture of sisterly love, became synonymous with freezing cold, physical agony, and the primal fear of death. To find an escape from this cycle of torment, ultimately, the shattered mind performed a total psychological severance. She severed all internal bonds, trading love for the cold mechanics of survival. This case fundamentally restructured how global authorities analyze violent criminal behavior. Evidence proved that true depravity avoids grotesque masks, favoring domesticity over the wilderness. In this scenario, the predator wore a tailored suit and a luxury timepiece. A mundane administrator utilized a surgical approach, employing data metrics to systematically crush 2 lives beyond recovery, treating human captivity solely as a tool for maximizing quarterly revenue, protecting his illicit shadow operations. The harrowing tragedy of the Cruz sisters serves as a chilling reminder that the most dangerous predators don't always wear masks sometimes. They wear tailored suits and hide behind spreadsheets. This case exposes a terrifying truth. When human lives are reduced to line items and inventory, the soul of society is at stake. The logistic ghost of Daniel Brown represents a modern evil, the banality of greed. It is a warning that a lack of empathy, coupled with a cold obsession for profit, can dismantle the most sacred human bonds with surgical precision. But even in the darkness of Unit 118, a powerful lesson emerges. Our humanity is defined by our connection to one another. Let this be a call to vigilance. We must look beyond the sterile facades of corporate routine and remain guardians of our communal safety. Value your loved ones, for the bond of family is a fortress that no cold calculation should ever be allowed to breach. We are not objects or units to be managed. We are a tapestry of stories, emotions, and shared blood. In a world that often prioritizes the bottom line, let us choose to prioritize the human heart. Protect your spirit, watch over your neighbor, and never let the warmth of compassion be extinguished by the cold mechanics of indifference.